Hey guys, and welcome to our live stream today where we are going to be covering how to secure your Microsoft 365 tenant. My name's Scott.
And I'm Ben.
And we are very, very close to each other, although it looks like we're really far away. He's right there. Today we are going to be rattling through, and I do mean this at pace, we're going to be going through how to secure your 365 tenant. And I just want to say some things at the beginning. I mean, firstly, thank you so much for joining, for taking the time out. If you do have to drop away at any point, we totally understand. This is also streaming live to LinkedIn and YouTube. So you will be able to go back to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/CloudNexus, and you'll be able to catch up and miss anything that you missed right there. So, to set the scene for you, this isn't a training course. There are no PowerPoint slides, or there are very few PowerPoint slides. But what we're actually going to be doing is going through some configuration for you. So let's just put up the agenda. And thank you for, in the background, super producer Kaylee, who's running the show for us today. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is the Azure Active Directory, and then we're going to be looking at InTune. Now, we're going to spend most of our time here because this is where you get some real value in getting the configuration done and really getting the security nailed down. Then we're going to move on to Exchange Online, and then finally into Teams and SharePoint. Now, we have 2 hours set aside for this. And for those of you who've done this task before, run through any of these settings, or even just given it a go, you know that is a huge amount that we want to rattle through. So we have some 60 or so configuration items that Ben is going to be doing. What I want to let you know is, let's just flip to the next page, Kaylee. The demo environment that we've got here, we haven't used one of the standard Microsoft demo platforms. We haven't built a tenant out that we've used before. This tenant was set up 2 days ago. So this is pretty much as out of the box for a Microsoft 365 tenant as you're ever going to see, okay? It is cloud only, so we don't have any hybrid Exchange or hybrid AD going on. So it is a simple setup, I'll agree. And we've assumed a Microsoft 365 Business Premium type of licensing. Or in other words, something that would have Azure AD Premium P1 and InTune, something that's got those entitlements. So you see I've popped on the bottom of the screen some other ways that you might license the features that we're going to look at today. But although we don't have those hybrid environments, most of what you're going to see today will be applicable to your tenant. And if it's not, then Ben's going to call out some areas where it might be different. Okay, let's put our beautiful faces back on. There we are. So I don't want to spend too long introing this. I'm going to give some more seconds for people to join. We have so many of you joining live. If you want to pop into the chat and say where you're joining from today, we'd be delighted to hear from you. And just one last bit of housekeeping before we jump in. If you want to ask any questions or make any comments, please do. Please put those in the chat. Because of the sheer amount of things that we want to cover today, we might not be able to get to every question, but if there's something that's really pertinent and really valuable for everyone who's watching, then we'll jump that, we'll put it on screen, and then we'll chat through it as well. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Ben, who's the genius here, and we're going to jump straight into configuring Azure Active Directory. Let's go, Ben.
Cool, yep. So first we're going to jump into the Azure AD portal, so you'll be familiar with this. It's where all the configuration gets done from anything Azure AD specific, and we'll be focused on that first because it's effectively the first of our entry point. So this is a brand new tenant this week, so some of the settings we'll be looking at, Microsoft have now made compulsory, or they're effectively enabling those by default. So some of those we're going to call out, but on those legacy tenants, the majority of them, it is worth definitely configuring those. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump straight in. To give you an idea, the first sort of security recommendation is around an emergency access. So we're going to use our base account for that emergency access. So you'll see where we'll be using admin at M365 boss. So we'll be excluding that account from our policies because we're going to effectively treat that as our emergency break glass global account. In real life, you'd be locking that down and maybe secure that to certain IP addresses and things like that. So you can only log in from a certain place. So you maybe want to say, well, you can only use a hybrid join machine or an Azure AD join machine to actually access that. So we're going to jump straight in, and we're going to make sure the Azure AD, the unified audit log is enabled. So the easiest way to do this is to use a bit of PowerShell, and surprisingly, it's in Exchange Online. So we're just going to double check that audit logs are not on. So I've got this PowerShell here listed. I'm just going to execute that. That'll come back as false. So we need to enable that. So we're just going to bring that up. So that'll be
And just while you do that, Ben,
Yeah.
we're going to post any PowerShell that we use. We'll post those in the comments once the event's complete, so you'll have access to those. Anything that we use or see, we'll make sure that you've got a copy of those. But don't forget, you can always pop onto YouTube and watch this again to cover any of those points.
Yeah. So before we do that, actually, because I've misplaced my thing, we're just going to jump to the compliance center as well.
Okay. This is always the great fun with live events, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah.
You do, I'll vamp.
So you can see here, we've not set up MFA on this, but we'll come back to that because that's on the next thing. So we'll just skip that for now. So we'll wait for that to happen. But while we're waiting for that to load, because it will be take a couple of minutes, we're probably just going to jump straight into conditional access, I think. So conditional access, we're splitting it into two phases. So conditional access should be where it's basically you enforce your MFA, you do your compliance checks on your devices, all those bits and pieces, block downloads. So our first task is effectively going to be securing that tenant. It's effectively the first thing we would recommend. So we're just going to jump into Azure AD here, and we're going to just scroll down to security, and we're just going to hit conditional access. As you can imagine, the conditional access is listed there. So we're going to cheat today. So we've got these new policies from templates. So whilst it's a preview feature, it's still creating effectively the same policy in the back end. So it's quite useful and really quick. So what we're going to do, we're just going to work through our base set of policies first. So you'll be familiar with blocking legacy authentication. So you can see here, we've got a list of identities and devices. We're going to focus on identities. So we're going to use a lot of these as our baseline policies. So we're going to pick our block legacy authentication because we want to make sure those old legacy protocols, SMTP, auth, the IMAP, POP, active sync, we want all those blocked basically. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to stick this in on mode. That's obviously warning us, we can ignore that. So we're just going to click next. We have a full review. You'll be familiar with what this looks like from a conditional access point of view. But yeah, it's reminded me I have to disable security defaults first. So you can see that's a brand new tenant. So before it allows us to create a new tenant, we have to disable those. So we're just going to jump onto there and we're going to turn those off. So if you're not aware already, the security defaults is a new way Microsoft are trying to secure a tenant by default. It does a lot of these policies by default. However, it doesn't give you any control. So we want that control because we've got different requirements. So we're effectively going to turn that off. And yeah, my organisation is using that, but that's just a bit of general information there. You can just do whatever you need to do. So we'll give that a second. And we're just going to go ahead and create that policy there. Give that a second. So that's our first policy to secure the tenant, effectively is blocking that legacy authentication. So if we just have a quick look at that, you can see even though that preview feature we've used, it's a preview feature, that's only preview to create the actual policy. The policy is still a traditional conditional access policy. So you can come in here at any point, jump in here, modify it. So you can see we're just going to add our admin account in there as an exclusion, just so we don't accidentally lock ourselves out on a live session. So you can see, just to quickly run through this, all cloud apps, conditions, the two legacy authentication clients here, and we've got control here. So the next simple policy is require an MFA. So again, we can either create one manually or use from a template. The template is so quick and easy, we're going to do that. So we just click identities there, and we're going to require multi-factor authentication for all users. So you can actually split them out. For simplicity, we're just going to require that for all users. So we're just going to go ahead and turn that on. Again, it's giving you a nice friendly reminder or warning that you're going to effectively turn this on without actually testing it. In real life, if you're pushing these policies out, you maybe want to do a report-only mode, look at the signing logs, and go from there. So we're going to go ahead and create that policy. Remind me, Scott, we need to come back to that audit log. Just
okay.
We won't come back yet. We'll get these built. So another policy we're going to do. So you'll be familiar with Azure Active Directory, your devices, and you've got some device settings in here. Basically, that you want to enforce people so when they're joining or registering a device with Azure AD, you're going to require MFA. So you can see here, you've got this control. Microsoft recommends this is moved to conditional access, so we're going to go ahead and move that. So we'll just jump in here, go back to quickly go back to conditional access. Lots of clicks, don't make it easy. So if we look at this template, we've got identities here, and we are going to, I think that must be under the other one. Can't see for looking.
Which one are you looking for? The multi-factor authentication for devices?
Yeah.
I would have thought it's under devices, right?
So let's just create one manually. So our policy here, all users, it's going to be effectively The key thing here, point out, this is user actions, not cloud apps. So the user action there is register or join device, and effectively your grant control is going to be require multi-factor authentication there. So you can see this is very specific, you can't do anything else, it's MFA or not. The idea is you move everything away from traditional settings into conditional access, so you've got one single point to manage and it will just work like that. So we're just going to select that and we'll stick that on and then we'll create, require MFA for join. Don't mind if it's spelled right, my bad typing. So you can see that we've got 3 base policies there. So we're not going to jump onto the device-based policies because we'll look at those when we get to the InTune section. So another recommended policy is to block unused device types. So for example, you may want every identity or every device that is connected to your tenant to effectively give its identity or its device type. So Windows, Mac OS, Android, iOS. So we're getting away or moving away from anything that doesn't declare its device type. So we're going to say, right, we're supporting Windows, Mac, Android, and iOS. So we're just going to create a new policy there. We'll do this manually. So block unsupported devices. Again, this will apply to all users. The cloud apps will be Office 365 or all. So you might as well go all. Our conditions, so we're going to have the device platform selected here. And this will be config yes, any device, and then we're going to exclude Android, iOS, Windows, and Mac. So you can also, if you wanted to support Linux, you can. However, we're not. So the key thing to remember here is we're doing a default block and then a specific exclusion. So we're not having to think about what devices we're having to block. It's blocked by default until we manually exclude. So that's one of the logics around that one there. So we'll click done on there, and our grant control will be to effectively block access. So just to double check that, we've got all our cloud apps here. So we've got all cloud apps, our condition selected there is any device platform is included, and then the exclusion is effectively our 4 device types we want to support. So we're going to do that, and then we're just going to turn that on and click create. All right. There's a bug for that grant control, block access, there we go, that's right. So we're just going to exclude our current user because we're going to treat that current user, as we mentioned, as our break glass. So go ahead and create that there. So that's our four key policies built. We are going to look at how we would block access from, I guess, unmanaged countries, if you want to call it that. So before we do that, we need to create those countries here. So we're going to jump into our named locations and we're going to add a country. So as we're in the UK, we'll pick the UK. And we will add another one as well. We might as well add the USA. Oops, apologies, I'm thinking that's a search. There we go. So you can see we've got our 2 countries that will be listed there in a sec. So what we're going to do, we're going to block all access except for these 2 named locations. If you wanted to, you can obviously be more specific with IP ranges, or if you've got people working in other parts of Europe, obviously you can add those individually. But these are just 2 examples. It depends on your organisation. So we're going to jump back here. We're going to create a new policy. And again, this is block unsupported countries. So again, this will apply to all users. If you've got valuable users, you may want to say, well, let's filter this to users, but to keep things simple, we're going to filter it to all. So our all cloud apps will be all cloud apps here. Our condition here will be locations. Yes, we're going to block all locations except the selected locations here, which will be the UK and USA. So we've got those 2 there. So you can see again, we're doing the default include any, and then you do a specific exclusion there to effectively, you're not having to think about it. You know it's there by default. So our grant control here will obviously be block and select, and you can see, don't lock yourself out. Obviously, Microsoft must have had lots of lock-ins out previously, so it gives you a warning. But as we mentioned, we're going to treat this as our break glass account, and we're going to leave that there. And click create. So that's effectively our base conditional access setup. We've got some additional policies we will be creating when we get to the device element. So require approved apps, things like that. But we'll jump back to those when we get to that section. So let's jump on to the next thing. So we're just going to jump out of the Azure AD portal here because we want to set our password policy. So again, because Microsoft like to make things nice and easy for us, it's a different portal. So we're just going to set our password policy here. So by password policy, I mean whether it's expired or not. You don't get to set the actual requirements for the complexity and things with Azure AD Cloud only, because that's set by Microsoft, and they have the whole intelligence piece when it comes to use passwords and those bits and pieces. So security and privacy. And we've got our password expiration policy here. So as you can see, this is a brand new tenant, so passwords are set never to expire, which is what you recommend. The recommendation is passwords don't expire, use MFA or passwordless sign-on. So this is a clean tenant, that's good. You may want to check this on those older tenants out there because there's many. So let's jump back into the Azure AD portal. I'm just going to note some of these off so we know we've come to them, because there's a lot. So let's just jump back into Azure AD, and we're going to do lots of quick wins, I think, now for the next few. So we're going to restrict the ability for users to access the Azure AD portal, because if you're not aware already, users can browse to AD portal and they can list users, see groups and things like that. They can't actually configure anything, but they can see it. So we're just going to go to users and then user settings. It's just on a slight slowdown. And basically, we're going to restrict access to the Azure AD admin portal. So you can click on here. So this is basically blocking access to non-admins, basically. So nice quick save on there. That's done. Really quick win on that one. So the next setting is by default something that is turned on for all tenants. However, on new tenants, should I say, so you can see this one here is on by default. On older tenants, it's not. So quick information on that. The combined security information registration experience, what a mouthful, is a way of signing up for MFA and SSPR, well, self-service password reset in one portal, nice and easy. So if you're not familiar with it, you get two portals, you have to do the same thing twice. It's really annoying. So this option here basically makes it available in one single registration process. Just works, really nice and easy. In terms of rolling out, you can obviously filter it to a selected number of groups, but the easiest thing is to do all. Most people are familiar with it, and if they're already signed up for MFA, SSPR will just effectively sort itself out. So following on from that, we're obviously going to turn on the self-service password reset. So we're just going to jump up a level here, and we're just going to scroll down to password reset. So you can see here, this is off by default, even on a brand new tenant. So we just need to effectively turn this on and then save. But before we do that, we're going to review what methods we're going to use for that reset. So we'll just discard that for a second. So at the moment, the default number of methods is 1. We want 2 because one method is not enough. So we can select all these, and also you can also use security questions as well. So this again varies massively between organizations. Bear in mind, you can't use app notification and app code as a single method. It's a one or the other, and then you either have to use email or mobile phone. Some people might say, well, email's too insecure, because that email address is an alternate email address. It's not the 365 email address. So security questions is potentially another way around, and you could argue, well, I don't want them to use the mobile phone because the mobile phone is on the same device as authenticator. So we're just going to set this as a base example. Security questions, you've got a load of built-in questions here. We would normally go for that, and then you just kind of add your predefined ones. These are US based, so you may want to retweak these if you're in a different part of if they're in the UK, if you want to bring it in line with the way the UK speak, I guess. So we'll just jump back there and we'll just turn that off. Just an example. So that's turned on. We'll save on that there.
Just while you're saving those authentication methods, great question that came in actually. So you mentioned just a moment ago about blocking user access to the Azure AD portal.
Yeah.
What do they actually see? I mean, they don't have any admin capabilities, but you were essentially saying they can enumerate the tenant.
Exactly.
Right?
So they can see what's there, see the users, see the groups, those bits and pieces. So it's more of a they can't go looking type thing.
I guess, if I think about it from a security perspective, if one account gets compromised and we're trying to block that lateral movement, right? So if they can enumerate all the accounts in there, now they can have more attempts. So you're quite right. They can't really do anything, but again, we're just trying to limit the amount of information that people can see. If they don't need to be able to see that information, then we want to lock it down.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So that's saved. So we've got, before we turn this on, we just need to double check the registration bit here. So whilst you can turn it on, you can also turn it off here. So always double check that this is on. And basically default 180 is fine for the reauthentication method. So that's both basically for SSPR and MFA, because you're using the same methods. So you can do some on-premise integration with not hybrid identity, as Scott mentioned. So we're just going to keep this nice and simple, and we're going to go ahead and turn this on. So save that there. And at some point, it's probably going to time out and it's going to make me sign up. So yeah, we'll leave that on there. Cool. So the next sort of couple of bits and pieces around apps and the app registration. So by default, users can register applications. We don't want that because we want that whole approval process. So as an admin, we know what applications have access to our tenant. So we're just going to jump into here and click on user settings. So there's two locations, completely different places. So you've got app registrations. I'm going to flick that to no. And again, a nice quick win on that one. And then we need to jump into our enterprise apps next. So Azure Active Directory, enterprise applications, and we're going to go to user settings just to review these. It's moved, but we want to look at this because we want to set up our consent requests as well. So before we do that, let's just jump to our consent and permissions here. So you can see allow user consent for all apps. Nope, we don't want that. So we do not allow user consent. And also another option now is we don't allow group owners to consent apps accessing their data as well. So we're going to go ahead and save that. So again, a couple of quick wins. So now we've got the do not allow user consent. Well, how are they going to raise a request with you to do that approval? It's going to be a bit of a pain. So Microsoft have introduced the ability to do the approval process, which is really, really sleek. So basically, users can request admin consent. So now if they try and register an app, by default they could, and then they could harvest whatever from your tenant. Now they have to request that, and that will hit whatever you define here as in terms of who are those reviewers. So users can request yes, and then we're just going to add our users here, and we're just going to select our default admin here and select that. In reality, you'd have a select or you'd use a group. Obviously, it's a brand new tenant with a couple of users. We're just going to pick one for an example there. Users will receive, all these other defaults are fine because the users will basically receive emails based on their requests, and obviously they will get reminders and things as well. So again, nice quick win to secure that application side of it when it comes to Azure AD. So the ability to integrate, I don't know, Salesforce, those type of things. Also, bear in mind if you use something like native mail or native mail on Android, it will request an app registration. However, you'll see when we get into the endpoint section where pushing people down the approved app route, so they'll be using Outlook and things like that, just for effectively so we can control the data on those devices.
It's worth mentioning as well, I think, that the user experience there is actually really quite straightforward.
Yep.
So when they do get a request, and it might be someone who's doing a legitimate act, they're trying to bolt in, an application into the tenant. The experience is really simple. It clearly explains, hey, you can't do this right now, but would you like to request, consent to do that? The alert gets flagged into the administrator's mailbox. It's who asked for it, which application, what permissions are they looking for, and so the admin can then do a proper review and decide, yeah, this is a legitimate request. They can have a discussion with the user and then go ahead and just approve it. So it's a nice, quick process. It is very clearly explained to the end users, but it is just something I think, again, I feel like it should be on by default, if I'm really honest, because otherwise it is possible for users to just consent to applications, and you can see oftentimes you'll ask these applications and it'll be a big long list. This application would like to do all these things, and there's a checkbox that says approve on behalf of all users in your tenant that they're able to press, which we definitely won't. So again, this nice quick movement, but a lot of security gain from it.
Cool. Go back to the screen.
Back to you, Ben.
Yeah, back to the fun. Cool. So the next one is company branding. So with company branding, we bring some familiarity to Azure AD, so users effectively know that they're logging into their own tenant, and if something changes, it hopefully makes those users a bit more aware of where they're sticking their credentials. So if we just jump up to Azure AD, we're going to do a very basic customization. So just click company branding here, and then we configure. There's very specific requirements when it comes to signing page backgrounds. If you don't meet these specific sizes, yeah, you can't add them. So quickly, some we made earlier, just move that out of the way. Quickly add those. So a nice quick Cloud Nexus background, and we've got a nice banner logo as well. As you can see here. So again, you can add a username hint, sign-in page text, add some additional bits and pieces here. To keep it simple, we're just going to add these. Again, that brings more familiarity to the tenant, so users know where they're logging in from, or to, should I say. So go ahead and save that. Do bear in mind when you set company branding, it takes as long as it takes. So just give it a couple of hours potentially for that to effectively take effect. Cool. So the next one, to mark that off the list, is our external collab defaults. So they've slightly moved that within the Azure AD portal. So we'll just jump back up here and we're just going to go to, just remind myself, external. External identities, there we are. And we've got external collab settings. You can see it's, keeping on top of this. So you can see here, our guest invite restrictions here are quite weak because anyone in the organisation can invite guest users, including guests and non-admins. We don't want guests inviting guests. So as a nice in between, we're just effectively going to set that to member users. So effectively a cloud user, an admin or someone that's actually created. And then you can also even be more specific and limit that. But as a good compromise, where we recommend the effectively member users only, basically, just to help with that team's management process. So users can add external guests to the teams, and hopefully we can address that with some other bits and pieces in 365 as well. So we're going to go ahead and click and save on that one. So a nice option on there. So I'll just mark that one off. So give that a second to think about it. Go. So the next option, we're going to look at some of the group governance options. So these are 365 groups. You don't necessarily get full control of the ability to manage security groups. And we all know 365 groups are the groups that just sprawl everywhere because everybody creates a team for every individual thing. So if we just jump into our group section here, we can do some expiration and naming policy. So if we just look under general, and just double check that looks good. Yep, so one thing we do like to tweak as well before we jump onto the governance is I don't really want users creating security groups. I'm happy with them creating 365 groups because they're creating teams and the whole collab piece. I don't really want them creating security groups because they're no value to a normal user. We want to create them as admins. You can actually restrict whether users can create or delete or whatever with 365 groups, but we don't recommend that because we want the whole collab piece to work. So we're going to go ahead and save that. So we've got some control here on whether the groups will expire and whether we can, what we want is we want the groups to auto-expire so we're not ending up with a million groups. What's quite useful with this, if for example all the owners of those teams or groups leave, you can add an admin address here, which will basically email the user that this group's no owners, it's going to expire, please review. So I'm just going to grab the username off of here.
Because that's really helpful for team sprawl, right?
It is, yeah.
Everyone's worried about just people making hundreds and hundreds of teams and it's sprawling out of control.
Exactly that. Oops, just grabbing this email address here because I can't remember it.
No worries. And then when you've got a second, we've got a good question that's coming as well.
Yeah, of course. So we're just going to save that there. You can be selective on the groups. So I'm going to go all because I want everyone to audit and review those groups because I don't want to keep them longer than I do. Just a bit on those, you can see here the renewal notifications are emailed every 30, 15 days, etc. Got a couple on conditions on exchange licenses to receive notifications. If a group's not renewed, it's deleted, and then that falls under the standard retention point for the deleted items within teams, and so that'll fall under the default retention bit. So if you've got retention policies, it'll still abide by the retention policies. If not, it'll just go by the standard default deletion rules and those bits and pieces. Cool. So we'll just save that, and yeah, your question.
Yeah, go for it. So Andrew Trevisani, he says, do you recommend just having admins create guest access so that Azure AD doesn't get cluttered?
Standard, no, because the whole point of Teams is the users. You don't want to be adding guests all the time for everybody because it depends on the size of the organisation. More often than not, you just want the user to be able to crack on. Ideally, you need to do some kind of audit exercise, so that'd be an audit task you maybe do once a month, or you can actually do some things with 365 to automatically review guests as well. I can't remember what license that falls under, but we can double check that, and we'll definitely get an answer today on that. Just to double check whether that falls under Azure AD P1 or whether we need P2 for that. So that'll be the guest reviews. So if it was me, I would definitely allow some users, or at least all the users, to be able to create those guests and just monitor that. And if you don't have the license to monitor that, do it manually, basically.
Because we've seen some large organisations, like 2,000, 3,000 people who've specifically made it so that only 2 people in IT can create guest access and can create groups, and that's quite an administrative overhead, right, for them to have to do that.
Yeah.
But there's that trade-off of, well, just the freedom of anyone can create anything. So I like the idea that we've got those expiring groups and that those get notified on, and then I like the idea that we can audit on them, but we'll need to check on that licensing.
Yeah.
Okay, follow-up question actually.
Yeah.
So is the group expiration date arbitrary, or can I dynamically adjust based on the active use of those groups? So the point here from Dan is that he's worried that someone might miss that notification and then an important active group gets shut down.
Yeah. So the group has to actually be active. So if there's any form of activity in it, whether it's a post, a file, whatever, it's classed as active. Okay. So it won't actually hit this threshold then for the countdown.
So if someone like opens a file,
exactly
not necessarily that we're changing things, but if they open a file, if they look at, they send a message in the team, then that's considered as activity, right?
Exactly, yeah. So for example, when you're looking at the SharePoint logs, the usage logs, you'll see like 50 files accessed, but there's not actually any changes or anything like that. So the whole process is sort of tracked that way. So it shouldn't cause an issue. And obviously they're going to get 30 days, 15 days, and then even if it gets deleted, you can still restore it. But the chances, if by then, hopefully they will have seen it or been some activity.
They will have noticed. Yeah. Well, do you know what? This is the great thing about having a live event, because look at this, and thanks to you guys, Azure AD P2 is required for the guest
there
access
we go. I thought it was. I didn't want to commit.
We've got Mitesh jumped in with that. He's also sent the link to the document, and Ben Singyard as well called out that we need Azure AD Premium P2 for risky sign-ins and for monitoring guest access. So thank you guys. I love this. We're all sharing together.
Yep. So with the risky signs, obviously you can review the audits, but we can't do anything fancy with conditional access until we've got that P2 license. Because Microsoft need to make the money. Cool. So the last bit, effectively, or the last change within Azure AD before we jump on to some InTune bits, is the LinkedIn account connection. So we'll just jump in here, user settings. While that slows down as it think about it. So we're just going to basically block the ability for users to link those as well. So we don't really want the ability for LinkedIn users to connect those profiles and harvest bits and pieces. So nice quick win on that one as well. So that one's effectively saved. One thing I do want to mention is we called out this is obviously not a hybrid identity. There's still many hybrid identities out there with exchanging things on premise. Everything we've done is fully supported on there. Effectively your source of your users is coming from Active Directory. So we just need to bear that in mind. It's effectively the same. Until you're doing any federation with Okta or anything like that, that's where it gets a bit more complex. But in terms of what we've done today, there's no reason why that won't work with any hybrid identities. So we're going to move on to the InTune section. So hopefully this will be of interest to a few people.
Do you want to just do a quick recap?
Yes.
I will give you 2 seconds to have a breather. Can you pop up my document? So I just wanted one thing to let you know, and then we'll come back. We've got some questions that have come through as well. So one thing to let you know, if you can pop up that document, if you can just show Ben's screen for me. Perfect. So we're actually using the Center for Internet Security baseline controls here, so the foundation that they publish. And we can share the link for that. I'm sure you guys are already aware of it. But I just wanted to let you know this isn't stuff that we're just making up in terms of the security settings. So when we go through the Center for Internet Security's baseline controls for Azure AD, which is bang on the page there, we've got the standard level controls and the more strict controls. Just stay on AD for me for now, Ben. And you can see from what Ben's just been through, we've kind of put ticks in place now for all of those things on the right-hand side. You can see we've ticked down through all of those. Now, there have been some things that we couldn't do. We couldn't do the password hash sync because we don't have a hybrid environment here. And we couldn't do the risky sign-ins, the user risk policies, because we don't have the licenses for those. We're assuming a business premium, and that's what we're using for this tenant here. And then the only other thing on here that is a no is that we've said ensure that the collaboration invitations are sent to allowed domains only. We could have enforced that, but we've chosen not to just because it's probably just a bit too restrictive, if we're honest.
Yeah.
So just to let you know, we're not just making this stuff up, and we'll keep coming back to this document as we go through. Kaylee, let's jump to us, and then let's see. We've got a question, Ben, from Jeremy, who says, how can I block access to Microsoft 365 applications from default? Oh, from a default IP.
Cool, yeah. So you'd create your conditional access policy, and you would have, so let's jump into it. We won't do it, but I'll show you the concept. So security, conditional access. So just a bit on that. So there's a bit of confusion when it comes to MFA and Office 365 and Azure AD. Always do MFA through Azure AD because you can do it in Office 365 if you're using the free versions. However, we're P1 only. So much more flexibility with conditional access. Just on that before I forget. So we're going to go ahead and create our new policy here. But before we do that, we would need a named location. So you'd define an IP address in here, block this zone, and then we would add the IP. It's not valid. I don't know. Block Google's. Sorry, we have to do a /32. Apologies. Yeah. So block the DNS. Yeah.
Sure, okay.
So you've got your block there. You would jump into your policy and you would create your. We'll look at the one we've got actually. So our block of supported countries, because it's sort of the same thing we're trying to achieve. So our condition here would be the opposite, effectively the other way around. We would effectively be selecting an IP address here to block, and then our exclusion will be all trusted locations or a selected location. So it's going to be tricky actually, because you can do it one way, so you can block an IP, but then you still need an exclusion. So it works better in one way. So that exclusion would be a bit of a bodge, because you'd be excluding a country effectively.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're essentially saying like specifically block this one IP address, but then allow everybody else.
Yes.
Whereas you're better off maybe saying these are the ranges or countries that I do trust, and block everything else. But it is possible. I think it just is.
Yeah, it's not something I've ever done. It's normally the other way around.
Yeah, it's a challenging way to do it.
Yeah.
But hopefully that helps, Jeremy.
Cool.
So InTune next, right?
InTune, yeah.
Cool.
So the good old endpoint management portal here. So if you guys are not familiar with this, it's an absolute beast. When people see it for the first time, they're quite overwhelmed just because it can do so much. However, if you focus it specific on the device platforms and the various sections, it's a lot easier. We're not necessarily using everything from here. We just are targeting certain bits and pieces. So the MDM approach, or the mobile management approach we're going for with this, is the ability to manage Windows devices from an MDM perspective. So on Azure AD join, we're going to manage macOS as well, MDM. We'll come across some of those limitations we've got with that, and we're going to use MAM when it comes to Android and iOS. You can do MDM for Android and iOS, but it was a bit too much to effectively slot into 2 hours. So we're going to focus on Windows, Mac, and MAM for Android and iOS. So before we do that, we've come up with so think of a scenario, we've come up with the enrollment strategy, or the MDM strategy. So we need to effectively set those enrollment restrictions so we don't get users inadvertently enrolling those device types we don't want. So we're going to jump straight into enroll devices. So you can see it doesn't necessarily flow that well in the portal. It's the first thing I need to do is configure device enrollment. It's halfway down the page. So it's a bit all over. So we've got our device platform restrictions here. We'll come back to the bits in a sec, but we're going to effectively set our strategy in our restrictions in here. So you can see here we've got our various restrictions. Depending on what you click on, it takes you to the same window. A bit of a weird UI thing. So if we click properties here, so you can see by default we're allowing all these in terms of enrollment into InTune. Careful to call out, these don't block the access to these. This is just blocking the enrollment, so that's just important to bear in mind. So you don't have to be worried about these. It's just the MDM enrollment. So we're not supporting MDM on Android Enterprise. We're not supporting device admin. That's the old version doing it. Don't even use that for any kind of MDM now. Some Teams phones do use it, so just you have to bear in mind and work with that. I think the latest versions are fixed. We're not going to any iPad or iOS. We're just going to allow macOS and Windows MDM, and we're going to. In fact, we're going to leave personally allowed because we'll come back to those and discuss some of the concepts. There's a bit of a weird bug with Windows. It has to be staged before you can block this, which more often than not is a bit of a pain. So you want to allow that. And again, if you want to bring a macOS device, if you block personally owned devices, again, you need to stage it with a serial number. But we'll come back to that and look at where that is. Just for simplicity, we'll keep it like that.
So just to be really clear on this page, what we're saying is we are blocking these devices from being an MDM device, right? Mm-hmm. So we're saying we're not going to enroll them as an MDM device, as in they're not going to manage corporate-owned devices for Android and iPad and iOS devices. Yeah. But for Mac and Windows, we're definitely going to take them under full MDM. And what we're going to do, actually, for those mobile device OSs, is we're going to manage them with MAM. So we're going to manage the applications rather than the devices.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
Cool.
And we'll look at some of the features and bits and pieces available in those. So we're going to just review and we'll just save that. So that's good. So the first thing we need to do is configure our Apple push certificate. So you need to register a certificate with Apple to allow you to push devices. So that's valid for both Mac and for iOS and iPad as well. So we'll jump into the devices section here, and we're going to click on iOS and iPad OS just to filter it down to make it easy for us. Again, it's the wrong way around. I would think enrollment was up here, but it's not. It's there. So it's after the fact. So we're just going to configure our MDM push certificate here. So we've got previous to this, we've set up an Apple account. So the Apple account will be a generic. I normally set it up with a distribution group, just so if the person leaves who's set this up, you can still reset this because it expires every 1 year. So you have to go ahead and effectively renew that. If you don't renew it with the same Apple ID, you have to re-enroll your devices, which is a big pain. So we're just going to download our CSR first. So that'll download there. So we've done that, and we're going to create our MDM push certificate in the Apple portal. So again, it gives you a nice link here. So this will give me a couple of seconds to log in. So I've logged in previously. May prompt for MFA. Give it a sec. Of course it does. So just bear with as I log on, because there's MFA on this by default now.
It's the beauty of live events in live portals, Ben. You go ahead, you get logged in.
And it's going to send me a text message as well. So
good old. Yeah. Well, this is one of these whole things where we looked at this and went, should we really do this as a live stream with live internet? And we all know what the Microsoft portals are like as well. So now we've got the Microsoft and the Apple portal to work with. But thanks you guys for watching along. This is great to see so many of you involved. And again, if you have any questions, do keep popping those in the chat. We'll try and keep coming back to as many of them as we can, because we're making good time, Ben. We're doing really well. You're already into InTune. So yeah, you go.
This is a big one though.
Yes,
so,
yeah, it is.
Regardless, so this certificate can be used for MDM on iOS, like I mentioned as well, and iPod. In this instance, we're using that same certificate for macOS management. So we're going to create our certificate here, and we need to effectively just accept some Apple terms, accept that, and we're just going to choose our file here. And where's that? Just move that over there. So just give us a second. So that'll be in our downloads. So InTune CSR, and we're just going to upload that. So you can see here we've got our Microsoft certificate. It's been issued, and we're just going to download that now. So you can see that's downloaded there, PEM format, and we're just going to jump back here. And we are going to put our Apple ID in here. So you can see I've just created a generic distribution group, Apple Push, and that's obviously the domain name associated with this tenant. Then we need to go ahead and select our certificate there. So that'll take a second. Oops, agree your conditions, obviously, and then upload. So what's nice now, we've done that. We can now go ahead and enroll a Mac. That's just how easy it is to enroll, configure and set up InTune to enroll a Mac. Obviously, you want to start looking at compliance and configuration, but in terms of actually getting a device or getting InTune ready for Mac enrollment, we could set up a Mac, install company portal on there, and then just click enroll, and that device would enroll. So that's that simple. We have got some configuration and compliance policies we will come back to shortly. We're just going to effectively get all the enrollment bits and pieces set up. So before we do that, we're just going to configure the Windows 10, effectively the Windows 10 enrollment. So we'll get that all ready and just discuss some of those concepts. So let's just jump back up to devices. Again, I'm going to filter by platform just because there's a million options in that section, which I don't want. And our key bit in here, Windows enrollment. So there's a lot more in here. We will come back to some of these settings, but the key thing we're trying to achieve is allow enrollment. Automatic enrollment will be on by default, I think, in this new tenant. Well, let's double check. Just thinking about it. Yeah, so it's on. What I like to turn off is WIP and MAM for users, for MAM for Windows. We're not using that, but it can cause some confusion with how users are signing in. And we'll look at that because we're going to do a live Azure AD join as well with a Windows VM. And if you click on a slightly different part of the signing process, it will do a MAM enroll rather than an MDM enroll. Our strategy is MDM for Windows, so we're going to turn that off. Some tenants, I think the older tenants, that's off. That's on. So we're going to turn that on, and that's on for everyone. I never recommend to filter this by users because there's no real point. If the user has to know where to do it, and if you turn it to users and you're doing any kind of autopilot on those bits and pieces, you have to remember to add users to groups. I try and keep away from groups and have everything default, all users, all devices, and then you have your specific exclusions, so you never have to think about it, basically. So go ahead and we'll save that. So now we could again come along enroll the device into InTune, nice and simple. Like I mentioned, on the other tenants, that's not by default. That's only on the newer tenants. Microsoft want everything in here, so they're going to force you. And you've got some other bits and pieces here. So the enrollment status page. So this is basically the status page of that enrollment process. So it's more useful when it comes to autopilot. However, you can turn it on for normal users. A bit on autopilot before we do it. Autopilot is just basic configuration for out of box. It's not a way of imaging a device. It's not a way of configuring a device. That InTune does all the configuration. So regardless of autopilot or a traditional Azure AD join, I say traditional, it's not. It's still effectively doing all the same because InTune or Endpoint is still managing all those applications, those security profiles, all those bits and pieces. So we'll just have a quick look at this. This is not necessarily security, but it's more best practice and use. So you can see here we're not showing any profile or configuration process here. We want to be able to give error messages, or we can at some point as well, once we start doing it, restrict some of the applications as well. So I'm just going to turn that on, keep it simple, and save that. When we create an application in shortly, we'll come back to that and I'll show you how we can limit the use of the machine until an application is installed. So we're at a point now where we've got basic Mac enrollment configured and base Windows enrollment configured. So all the work and intelligence comes with what we're going to deploy in terms of configuration. But before we move on to that, we're going to look at app protection policies because we want to secure our Android and our iOS devices. So we're going to quickly jump to apps and we're going to go to app protection policies. So you can see here under the app section, there's a million options. We only care about this. You can obviously do app configuration, deployment, all those bits and pieces here. We just want app protection. So we're going to quickly go through this because there's a general recommendation. If it doesn't suit, change it to suit. So we have a recommendation on there. So we're going to create an iOS one. This will be exactly the same for Android. Slightly, there's a couple of different options, but they're pretty much the same. So iOS MAM, you can be as creative as you like with that.
You were up all night thinking of that one.
Yep. So we're going to target this to all device types. So if you wanted, you could, if you were doing MDM devices, you could be more relaxed when it comes to MAM. So you could say, well, if you want more control of your data and you want to use native mail or whatever on the iOS device, you can say, right, you need to do an MDM enroll. But keeping it simple, we're going to apply this to all device types, even though we're only supporting what this sees as unmanaged, so non-MDM based devices, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Someone's angry. So we're going to, this is a fairly new change. We're going to apply this to all apps. So all apps that support MAM are listed in there, so you can control data, manage that data in all those apps. The majority of them are Microsoft apps. There's a handful of third-party apps which are slowly progressing, so hopefully as that grows, you'll be able to protect and manage that data in all of those. So we're going to be mean. We're going to block the backup to iTunes because we're backing our 365. One thing to do call out is whilst we're requiring the use of Outlook, you can still have personal profiles on Outlook as well. So if you've got your Gmail, your Outlook, whatever, it's context aware, so it's not going to affect that. So we're not going to allow any sending of org data. We're going to only allow sending of org data to policy managed apps. So when you send within Outlook or whatever, and we're just going to exempt these defaults. So it gives you a nice typical set of applications. So calculator, a couple of built-in bits and pieces in there. So like you can still use the keypad for sending details for like a phone number and things like that. Yeah.
That used to be one of the most annoying things. You would turn this on and you couldn't copy and paste to put it into the dialer to make a phone call from your email. Fix that now, which is nice.
So you can see here we're going to block the saving of org data other than whether it's SharePoint or OneDrive, but you can see here we can have a bit more control, so there's Box, and you can allow it to the photo library as well. We're going to be mean because we only want our bits and pieces on OneDrive and SharePoint so we can track it. So you've got, just I mentioned there, the transfer to any dialer app, but you can be specific on the dialer apps. It's probably more of an issue, I think, with Android because you've obviously got more control over that. Receive data from other apps. We don't mind bringing data in from other apps, but again, you can manage that and restrict that. We're going to restrict cut, copy and paste as well. So policy managed app with paste in. So we're going to allow people to manage and copy data and allow paste in, but it's only from those managed apps, so all the Microsoft applications basically. We're going to block third-party keyboards. This will be an issue on Android if, for example, you've got maybe if you've got a Samsung, I think some of them sometimes have third-party keyboards. So I normally allow that one. We're going to encrypt org data, so this is encrypted in the context of the application as well, so we don't have to worry about the phone, and we're not going to impact someone's personal phone. And we're also allowing the sync policy, so you can sync some of the data with the native apps or add-ons. So you basically want to be able to sync your Outlook contacts with contacts on the phone, basically. And you can restrict the web content transfer as well and limit this to any app on Microsoft Edge. So if you're going to be specific and say, right, any org data needs to be browsed through Microsoft Edge, but in reality, who installs Edge on iOS? Probably Scott, but I don't. But you will leave that on any, and we're going to allow data notifications as well. So again, quickly through that, this is going to be exactly the same for Android. So we'll just click next on that one. So our access requirements, so we can set a PIN on those applications. So we don't necessarily have to control a device PIN. So people who bring in their own phones or whatever, it's not really going to affect them. So if we're going to be mean and say, right, you need a 12-character PIN, obviously that's not going to affect the whole device. I say 12-character PIN, obviously you can use biometrics and that works as well. So we'll go for maybe 6. We're going to allow Touch ID, we're going to allow biometrics, etc. Face ID. We can force a PIN reset if we want to, probably not. You can also apply a PIN when the device PIN is set, so you can configure this to not required. So if you're doing an MDM of the device, if a device PIN is set, or if you, in fact, even if the device is not managed, as long as it's got a PIN, you could be more relaxed and say, well, as long as that device has got a PIN, pretty much I think iOS forces you to do it anyway. You can say, well, I'm not going to force you to do an application PIN. You still have all those controls on there. And this particular one here is a setting you don't really configure. I think it's something to do with, I can't remember what it is now actually. Yeah, so you don't need to log in basically. That basically forces the use of work or school credentials in the app, and we don't want that. We want a bit more control. So and that's why I just double check that. So conditional launch. So if we failed PIN 5 times, you have to reset your PIN, so you have to go through the whole MFA process. If the device is off for 720 minutes, Outlook won't launch and you can't access those data. I'll access that data until the application becomes available again. So by available again, I mean speaks to 365. If the device is offline for 90 days, if it comes back online and it still doesn't see the internet, it will do an auto wipe of that data. Obviously, you can tweak that, so maybe you want 30 days, whoops, not 30 days. It just depends on your own, but the general recommendation is 90 will be fine. And we've got some device conditions here. You can see here we can block jailbroken and rooted devices, and you can be specific on OS versions and device models. I tend to shy away from the OS versions because they're updating that quick. You may want a minimum, so I don't know, you may go iOS 13 onwards, but in more often than not, the Outlook supported iOS version keeps up with this, so you can't actually install that on an older version of iOS anyway, so they're not going to be able to get access. So we're going to go ahead and click next. So something really annoying with man policy is the inability to do an assignment to all users. So we're going to quickly create a dynamic group that applies to all users here. So a new group, it will be a dynamic security. MAM again, and we're going to just do a dynamic user, dynamic users query, and it's just going to be account enabled equals true. So it'll be as simple as that. Save, create. That'll take a while to enumerate because the dynamic groups tend to take 30 minutes or so to update. So we've created our all users dynamic group. What we can do now is just effectively assign that. It's probably not going to list it because we're already in the wizard. Oh, yeah, it is. There we go. We're lucky. So we'll just go ahead and I shy away from using that all users group because that's the default one. I normally create an individual one just in case anything happens to that. I know I've created that and that's mine. So I'm just going to head and save that. So we're going to go ahead and create that policy there. So when a user comes along and installs Outlook on their phone, they will then basically, if they install Outlook, they log on, it will automatically apply this man policy now. However, there's nothing at the moment stopping them from still using native mail and bypassing this control. So that's where conditional access will come on, and we'll look at that shortly. So moving on, we're not going to do the Android one because it's exactly the same. It just applies to an Android. I'm just conscious of the time. But if we get to it, we'll come back to it. But it's exactly the same policy. It's just the platform type there says Android.
And then just to restack for people, just in case they're not 100% familiar with MDM and MAM, essentially what we've said there is for all those PIN controls, encryption controls, not backing up, the device to Apple iTunes or for encryption on the device, all those settings, that only applies to those sort of applications that we've selected, right? Those Microsoft enlightened applications. So we're not managing the device, we're not controlling the entire device, we don't have to enroll the entire device. This is just specific to the application data in those apps. So if the PIN is completely unlocked, not encrypted, if the phone's unlocked, not encrypted, doesn't have a PIN, any of those things, and you go ahead and open Outlook, it's still going to say, hey, I need a PIN, or I need biometrics, or I need something. So all of those things are still going to be enforced on a device that you don't control, which is why MAM is just so powerful. So just it's worth restacking just in case some other people haven't seen that. Can I ask you 2 questions?
Go for it.
Dan wants to know, just coming back to your point about all users or all devices, he says he's always been a fan of the school of thought to use security groups to assign almost anything. It's saved his bacon more than once, is what he said.
Yes, so it depends whether it's effectively a greenfield site or whether it's traditional and you're making changes. So if it's a new InTune deployment, I normally go all devices and then have specific exclusions because we want everything designed to be secure by default. When you're building on new policies, obviously filter them to specific users or devices for testing. However, I shy away from doing manually group assignments because they always get forgot about, and 6 months down the line, the person who built the policies left, and that group or that policy never gets applied, and it remains there forevermore. So I tend to try, if you're pushing out something new, which is untested, filter it, then transition that to BAU when you're happy with it, which then that becomes effectively all users or all devices. More often than not, it's all devices, because all users' InTune policies are, not going to say clunky, but not as dynamic as they should be, basically.
Because there is a big lead time in when you're making change to those policies and them actually hitting devices as well. So, okay, and then the other question, Andrew's got a specific one, so we might not know, but he says, have you ever allowed iOS calendar but not mail?
Yes.
You have?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I would do with that, we would basically, let me just jump in here. So what I would do an MDM enroll, because you need to manage the settings on those phones. So you'd still have MAM, you still have those controls in place. However, you're giving the user the ability to obviously use the calendar. So what we would do in there, so if we just jump back to iOS and iPad here, we would create a mail profile. So we're going to just use, in applications, devices, configuration, profiles, and we'll just create one here. So we would pick an iOS, and we would pick from a template, and we would pick an email profile here. So we would effectively do the MDM enrollment, whether it's Company Portal or Apple Business Manager, and then we would then come in here, and then we would force the configuration of email in here. So native mail will be set up automatically. We would then only allow calendar only sync here, and then we would make sure that users are not allowed to change those settings. So you're forcing a profile on there, you're forcing calendar sync only, but though you're not allowing users to change it. So you can only really achieve that, like I say, with MDM, but that allows you to work around that.
Okay, wow.
Because that's one of the biggest issues with MAM is people love the iOS native calendar and the inability to sync. If they want that, you say, well, you need to do an MDM so we can have a bit more control. So that's where you can get a bit more intelligent with the policies and how you're going to apply them. But yeah, that's how I would work around that. Still have your MAM, bit of MDM as well, and then you can obviously configure that. Just quickly, before we jump on to the next section, within applications as well, you can do what they call an app configuration policy. So these specifically apply settings to individual apps, so the Microsoft apps. So you can do managed devices or managed apps. So you can say, well, if Outlook comes along, I'm on a MAM device, so I've not got full control of the device, I can be specific here and say, well, I'm going to block certain bits of the app I don't like. So you can see here, I've got a load of Outlook configuration. I'm going to say, well, I'm going to block third-party add-ons, for example, and I'm going to block calendar sync, things like that. So you can actually control bits and pieces within the application if you're not doing MDM as well. There's not a lot there, but obviously you can see what's there. We're not getting recommendations of such on that, because that's very organisation specific. But you can come in and have a look in there and see what's available. Okay, so we just click OK.
Okay, we're just checking, guys. Seems like Ben's microphone's going in and out, so you let us know if we're losing you, but we'll keep going.
Yeah, cool. So that's that. So thank you for that question. So now we're going to move on to doing some configuration. So we're going to quickly go through some of the Windows configuration. So we're going to jump to devices again. I can go to configuration here, or I can filter it by platform. We're going to do some Windows stuff. So we're just going to click on Windows here. We've got multiple options. So we've got update rings, feature updates, and quality updates. So we're going to discuss some of those concepts. So we're going to create an update ring, which is our default 7 or 14-day defer. So we're just going to defer updates by 14 days. You can see set that here. You can tweak this to suit. We're not going to upgrade to Windows 11 just yet. And we're just going to leave this pretty much as the default at the moment. And many of you will be familiar with this because it looks a lot like group policy-based settings. Everything when it comes to update rings is all based around maintenance times and those bits and pieces. So you can tweak this to suit your active hours. One thing I do call out is you cannot manage what updates are approved when it comes to update rings. However, you can actually control that in some of the other settings, but not to the extent of, for example, the traditional WSUS or SCCM. So what we're going to do now, we've created our very base policy here with our 14-day deferral period. We're going to do an assignment section here, and we're going to add all devices. Again, you can create different groups if different groups need different deferral periods. However, keeping things simple, we at least want an update ring on every device we've got. So we're going to set that to all devices, next that, and create that. So that's a base policy set up for Windows updates. You can see that's really simple. The next couple of options are feature updates and quality updates. So these add to the confusion because these don't necessarily do what you think they might do initially. So if we look at this feature update review policy here, so basically you can hold a Windows version. You can hold a Windows device at a certain version, but that hold also gets the device up to that version as well. So you've got two ways of doing it because our update ring will still get the device to that version. This particular setting here is going to hold it. So you can say, right, I'm going to define this policy. I'm going to hold our machines at 21H1. I'm not sure, certain organisations, there may be a requirement for that, but I do not recommend setting that unless there's a specific scenario for it. But that's what this particular section does here. If you hold it at a particular version, you need to remember in 6 months' time, you need to change it. The next one's quite useful because it allows you to expedite those updates. So if we create a profile here, and we're going to make sure that any device in InTune doesn't wait 14 days before updates. So you can see here we've got our out-of-band updates, our patch Tuesdays here. So you can see you don't get that many, but I'm going to say, right, I've got new devices from today. I want to expedite to the 20th of the 6th out-of-band updates. The number of days to restart is 1 day, or I can say be mean and say 0 days. So you've got your update rings, a device comes along, joins InTune, it will get that deferral period, which you don't necessarily want. You have a policy here that has a deferral period, has an expedite installation policy. Bear in mind, it may take a day, but it won't take 14, just the way the InTune works. However, you can pick your installation version there. As you can see, you don't get them all listed. You just need to remember to come back in next month and pick your latest version, basically. So again, next to that, and you would assign that to a device-based group. So again, Microsoft want you to be very specific on the devices you're expediting, so you may want a dynamic group for devices. So we won't do an assignment on there, just conscious we've already created a group and we're not going to waste time on that. So we'll just go ahead and create that. So a quick summary, update rings, day-to-day patching, management, controlling those deferral periods. You can have as many update rings as you want. The way I do it, I have a default that applies to all devices. I would then have another one that maybe have a 7-day defer, and that 7-day defer group that has devices in that group is then excluded from this one. So you're only getting one update ring on there. So these are the ones, feature updates if you want to hold a version, and quality updates is if you want to expedite. Again, these are preview, so whilst they work, Microsoft say you shouldn't use them in production, but yeah, you can make that decision. Cool. So really quickly, we're just going to set up a couple of applications. Again, not quite security related, but it hopefully adds to the InTune package we're showing you. So applications, Windows, we're just going to have some really quick applications here. So we're just going to add the Office suite. So you can see here that's built in. We'll just select that, and we're just going to next this, because you can fine tune this. However, we're just going to accept the default. We have to pick our update channel. Let's go monthly enterprise. all devices. Just keep things simple. Typically, you always want Office on all devices anyway. So we've created an update package. So you can see how simple it is to deploy Office. This concept works if you're doing any hybrid join on Azure AD devices, on-premise devices as well. So if you do a hybrid join of a Windows device, you can use InTune to then manage the Office bits and pieces. So as part of that, I'm just going to quickly, we'll just quickly move on to another really useful policy, which I always show everyone because it's really useful and really easy. So what we're going to do, so Microsoft confused things. So we've got devices, we've got device configuration. We've also got endpoint security. So endpoint security also allows us to do device configuration. However, the device configuration in here is a bit more granular or specific. So what I always do is we have a security baseline when it comes to Windows. So you can do Windows, Defender, or Edge. We're going to create one for Windows 10. And we're just going to create this baseline. This baseline is tried and tested. It's Windows 10 and later. The November 2021 baseline is pretty rock solid. The only change I make is some of the user elevation behaviors, and we'll quickly look at that. So you can see here we've got a million settings. These don't necessarily restrict the user's ability to do things. It limits and secures Windows. So if you're going down the cloud-only strategy route, all these settings you set in here won't cause you any issues, basically. So next, scope. If you want to use scope, you can. We're not. And we're just going to add this to all devices because we want our devices secure by default. So again, we're going to next and create that. So I'm going to come along. I've made my policy. I need to have a tweak in this policy because I know for a fact I want users to be able to elevate. So I can elevate onto a secure desktop and do run as basically. So I can come along, do some remote help and sort them out. So if we just scroll down, you can see that this is a setting I don't like. So standard user elevation is automatically deny. I'm going to prompt for credentials on a secure desktop. So I, as an admin, can come along, log in and do a run as basically. That's what that fix is. That's the only fix or tweak I make to this now. And we can review and save that. What's interesting, whilst we've made a change, you can say, well, what happens if we have a later baseline? Because obviously that's the latest. You can come along and you can change that version. However, you can keep your existing customizations or you can export a list of what's changed and make your own assessment. So you're not having to reinvent the wheel. If you can, well, what changes did I make a year ago? You can accept those changes or review and approve. You can see there's no upgrades, so there's no migration at the moment. But that's what you would do on there. Quickly as well, we've got an Edge baseline as well. So we'll quickly create that. And again, this applies a lot of default settings to Edge. Bear in mind, this blocks extensions unless you specifically allow them. That's one of the biggest things within here. You may want, if you've got certain extensions you're using, you may want to come and add them in here. And we're just going to next, and all devices, next, and create that one as well. So we've done our two baseline policies when it comes to secure Windows. We've not done BitLocker yet, and this is where the confusion happens because we can do that in multiple places. So you can do that here. So these particular policy settings here, I'm just going to call them out because you can do all this listed here. You can also do that in traditional config policies. So you can do your disk encryption, your antivirus. Don't do your antivirus here because you've got that all covered in your security baseline. However, if you're not happy with the security baseline, you can split those out in here. You can also do some advanced bits with attack surface reduction as well. It gets really complex and attack surface reduction breaks Windows more often than not. So just use that with caution and maybe stick it in monitor mode. We're not going to do that today just because it's really involved. However, we are going to go ahead and create a disk encryption policy, but I'm going to do it my way, or the way I've used, and I know it guarantees it works. So we're going to jump into devices, and it allows us to explore some of the other config options as well. We're going to look at Windows, and then we're going to create our config policies here. So we'll just create that there. And you can see here we've got Windows 10 and later. So this supports full Windows 11 as well. And we've got two device options here. So we've got setting catalogs, which are effectively, think that as a shopping list for settings or your templates. This is new, it's still in preview. Anything new when it comes to, for example, managing your Azure virtual desktops, you would use setting catalogs. So anything new they're developing will come here. However, there's nothing, and templates are fully supported. And when you're doing certain things, just make life a lot easier. So we are going to jump in here and we're going to look at our endpoint protection policy. So endpoint protection, just conscious, go next on there. So we've got you can do a lot of bits and pieces here. We just want to do Windows encryption. We're going to fly through these settings. Obviously, We're going to warn, and we're going to allow standard use to enable encryption. This one's important because when you're doing an Azure AD join, you want that BitLocker to happen immediately, and more often than not, standard users are doing Azure AD joins, whether that's through autopilot or manually, and we're going to configure those, and we're going to, I don't know, I normally go for 256, but the performance issues, well, these are no performance issues, it's just people think they is, so they always go for 128. I've never come across it, or whether it is, it's negligible anyway. Encryption for movable devices is always ASCBC. So we're going to require, we're not going to require any, well, we are, sorry, we're going to require additional authentication at startups. We're going to use TPM because we don't want pins, because more often than not, everyone ends up with the same startup pin. So we're going to require TPM. We do not require startup pin with TPM, and we do not want a startup key either. Allow compatible TPM startup key with PIN. Do not allow startup key with PIN. Yeah. So we're requiring TPM for startup. We do not want a PIN. We do not want a startup key, and we're not worried about the compatible TPM as well. So all those other bits and pieces here are based on setting pins and those bits and pieces on there. You can do OS drive recovery as well, and we want to make sure we store these in Azure AD, and I don't tend to block recovery options because sometimes the users are good enough to do their own recovery, and Company Portal shows them their own BitLocker key anyway, and we're going to make sure they're stored in Azure AD there, and we're going to allow key rotation as well, and obviously you can configure this. This is Azure AD only, so we're going to effectively rotate those keys. And we're going to store the data in Azure Active Directory before enabling BitLocker, so we're guaranteed we've got those decryption keys, so we can go ahead and fix the device if something happens. The fixed data drive settings will be exactly the same here. We're not going to do them because we're just doing the same thing. Worried about time. So we're going to go ahead and click Next. We're going to add all devices, and we're going to go Next as well. So you can obviously configure the assignments to suit. You want TP on everything, so we're just going to go ahead and create that policy. So you can see here we've done our endpoint security baseline in this endpoint security section here. We've come along and done our endpoint protection and spelt it wrong, but that's our BitLocker. And then our next key policy which we're quickly going to do is basically the advanced health monitoring. So the advanced health monitoring is really nice, and we're not able to see that because it takes a while to update, but basically you can review start performance times, what applications are crashing, stop codes, all those bits and pieces. So really nice, and always recommend enabling this. It gives you some advanced features as well, and we're going to do Windows updates and endpoint analytics. If you have enterprise as well, whether that's within your licensing or an add-on, you can also do proactive remediations as well. We're not going to look at those today, but it allows you to look for a condition, then automatically apply something to fix it. So that works quite well when it comes to an example of that. Maybe if you've got some NTFS permissions you want to try and tweak, or you want to remove the native Teams consumer app that now appears on Windows, you effectively use one of those. That's an option to auto remove it based on what it's seeing, basically. Because you'll find with the consumer app for Teams is it will always be there, and it's an Apex package, so it's a user package you have to remove. That's what fixes it. So click Next, and again we are flying that to all devices, and we're going to create that there. Whoops, just pulling the turn the office to bits. So right, so we've done our security baselines. We've got some base policies in place. Just going to mark those off so they get lose track. So what we're going to do now, we've got business Premium, so we're going to onboard our devices onto the Defender for Endpoint, which is effectively Defender on steroids. So what we're going to do is jump to security.microsoft.com. Give that a second to load. Yep, so he's wanting me to sign up for SSPR, Scott. So if you just want to
I will vamp away while you do that. Yeah, let me have a look through some of the comments. So we had some great comments in. Ben Singyard said that elevation privilege hack is a bit of a game changer, actually, so he's really happy to see that. That's good stuff. Kaylee, can you scroll up on the comments for me? Let's have a look. What have we missed? Let's see, we've done that. So, no, that's good. Oh, yes, so Jez, yeah, we got a question from you earlier. It says, how do you receive all the admin alerts for all the portals that you look after? I've got to be honest, Jez, we don't have a fantastic solution for that yet. It's still something we're looking for a great answer on. What we do, wherever possible, is we'd put Azure Sentinel in, and then we'd aggregate that into a single instance, and then we take those alerts wherever they are and pop those straight into our PSA system. So we've got that going into Halo, so we can kind of aggregate those and at least have a look at them. I don't think it's a perfect solution, but it's certainly one that's kind of operationally functional for us right now. I think, like many other MSP operators, are still looking for that fantastic single tool that looks after multiple tenants, looks after the baselines, bring everything together and gives us an easy point of management. It just isn't there yet. There's some great third-party tools, but nothing that's really doing everything that we want it to do. So it's still that evolving journey. What else have we got? I saw... yes, so Dan Baird was asking, is there an iOS version of that personally owned and corporate profile that you get on Android?
Yeah.
There is?
Say that again, sorry, I missed that.
So
sorry, I just
I think the answer is no. On iOS,
yeah.
So can you have an iOS equivalent of that personal and work profile that you get on Androids?
No. No concept.
But the control on iOS is really good for MAM, right? So it almost feels like you don't necessarily need it.
Yes, so there's no concept of work profile. The work profiles are quite nice on Android. There's now work profile based profiles as well, so you can have both types on one device. There's no concept yet on iOS, but that's an Apple thing. However, you can still do a company portal based enrollment if you're going down the full MDM route. You don't get supervised mode, so you don't really have that full control of the device, so the users kind of have a bit more confidence that you're not doing everything on their device. If you want supervised mode, it's the whole Apple Business Manager route, and then you completely own that device effectively. So I think Apple have gone down that route. You can have a bit of control. If you want full control, you need to buy the devices a certain way and then manage them a slightly different way as well.
Yeah, so yeah, Jez is saying actually for his alerts, just capturing back on that question, he's got a contact and then that all comes into a distribution group for all those alerts to centralize it. Again, yeah, I totally agree. There's not a great answer right now, if I'm honest, or not one that we've seen, but if you're in the comments and you've got a fantastic way to manage and centralize alerts from multiple tenants, shout out, because we'd all love to know as well. Rico jumped in. Hey Rico, he says, what are your thoughts with Mac devices? Would you put them in Intune or would you stick with the likes of Jamf? I know, that is such a good question.
It's such a tricky question, because with Jamf you can obviously do the whole compliance evaluation with Intune as well, so you can still track compliance, which in reality is what you want with your conditional access anyway. So there's not a right or wrong answer, I don't think, for that either. I can't answer that question. It's a difficult one. With Jamf, obviously, you get a bit more control of the Azure AD logons and bits like that. You can do more of a sign-on approach, but I'd maybe say, well, more often than not, most organisations have a small number of Macs and they can get away with company portal because they're assigned specifically to one user. That one user is normally the CEO or CFO or whatever, and it never leaves their hands. If it's a shared device, I would probably go down the Jamf route with compliance evaluation within Intune. I would probably say that's
yeah, and
best.
I think that the reality is budget as well, right? Because if you can afford to have Jamf, then actually having Jamf and Intune is a great, combination.
It is, yeah.
But if you don't have the budget, then actually it's good enough is the control that we can get around applications and data and protection with MAM on Mac OS.
What's quite nice as well, if you go down Mac OS with Apple Business Manager, the device becomes supervised, so then you can use managed Apple IDs as a form of sign-on. I think you can, certainly with Mac. You certainly can with iPhones and iOS. I'd have to double check, but I'm almost sure you can still do it with Mac OS as well. If not, I'm sure it'll be coming soon. So that's a way of controlling identity. It's just you're effectively creating a new local profile on that Mac or iPad, I guess.
Jez is saying company portal MDM for Macs for him. That's a win for him. Andrew had a quick question. It was just about app packaging. Now, he says basically they're trying to get Windows Store apps pushed out via Intune, trying to push out things like the HEIF image extension and the HEVC video extension. He's assigned it to all users, but it's not deploying.
So if you're doing traditional store app deployments, you need to effectively download or buy the offline version of the app within the store. So you'll see, for example, when you're doing Company Portal, there's an online and offline version. But there's an option in the portal to select it somewhere in settings. I think you need to basically show offline versions. You need to buy the offline version which will then sync as long as you've set up your store sync, and then you can then assign that, and I think that's probably the issue with that. Do bear in mind the store support ends next year, Microsoft Store. I don't know if there's an actual like-for-like replacement yet, but I think you can get hold of the MSI exec files and do a manual deployment of those as well, potentially. So I'd maybe just look at that initially and take it from there. Yeah. I'm hoping the Windows package manager bits and pieces will improve, and then that will get slotted into InTune. But I don't think it's not there yet. It's still relying on that store.
We've got a couple more questions. Have you got time for questions? It is 4:20.
Yep, so what we'll do, we'll just jump back to the screen.
Okay.
So this may or may not work, because if you're not familiar with the security portal, it likes to present random error messages, and with it being a new tenant, I guess it's still warming up, I guess. So Business Defender for Business. So Windows Defender for Business, basically it's effectively the package one of the Defender add-on you can buy. It's inclusive Business Premium. If you've got E3, you don't get any of it. If you've got E5, you get the Plan 2 version of it. The process is the same. However, this looks confusing because it's saying it's Microsoft Defender for Business. It's the same thing. It's just Plan 1 version. So this portal is, once you log on and it's a brand new tenant, it constantly nags you to run through this wizard. So we're going to quickly run through this wizard. I'm just going to select our Scott, and he's going to be a security admin. So we're just going to quickly do all this, and we're just going to search. Just jump back here and just grab an email address, because I can't remember the Microsoft one. Just having a think. So basically, it forces you to set up, and this allows you to synchronize Defender with InTune, so you can do all the lovely management and bits and pieces within there as well. So add Windows devices. So there's a couple of ways. So I just want to touch on the Defender for Endpoint, because it's improved massively. So you don't just need Defender. You don't just need Endpoint Manager. You can onboard with scripts, group policy, or you can, obviously, there's a VDI option as well. We're an InTune house here, because obviously we're doing a cloud only, we're doing Windows enrollment, MDM, so we're going to use MDM to download this package. So I'm just going to download that onboarding package there. Come on. There we go. So we're just going to continue on there, or then we can basically allow this to do all the options. So we're just going to click that, submit that. If you don't do this stupid wizard, it nags you every time. You just get a random error message when it fails. So we're going to leave that to crack on, and we'll come back to that. Oh no, it's done that. Oh, amazing. So device configuration. So the security portal, if you've not come across it already, is they've done a lot of merging that brings all the security bits and pieces in here. When it comes to alerting, obviously you can configure a lot of alerting in here. And obviously you can look at your device inventories and bits and pieces. When it comes to Windows, they're listed here. You get a list, you get your risk level, your exposure levels. It looks quite scary, because it'll list all that out-of-date versions of Chrome, for example, all those bits and pieces as well in there. So while we wait for that to warm up, I'm going to give that a couple of seconds just to sort itself out. But while we're doing that, we're just going to do an Azure AD join. So I've got a Windows machine I built earlier. So this is the latest version of Windows. We're going to do an Azure AD join while we wait for Defender to warm up. So this is, think of this as a way of us bypassing autopilot. So autopilot process will do that all for us. However, this machine's already built. Like I mentioned, all the intelligence is in InTune, where the autopilot is literally out of box. So to prove the concept, we're just going to do a traditional join. And if you've got devices that are out there already, you could do an Azure AD join. More often than not, they're usually quite dirty, so I'd recommend a rebuild or a reset is usually the easiest option. So we're going to call out some specific settings here. So when it comes to connecting to work or school, you can click connect. Just a moment. You can add an email address there. If you do that method, it will do effectively a MAM Windows join. If we're going to allow that, we've blocked that because we've turned that off. However, we want an Azure AD join. So this is where a lot of people get confused. They will just default there, and they're thinking, well, I'm not managing the device. I'm getting a weird error message. We're wanting to do in a traditional Azure AD join. So we're just going to wait for that to kick in. So just bear with me as I grab my credentials. Clipboard. Just going to use an admin account. So bear in mind the account you use. So you can see here our customizations applied. I'm just going to sign in here. It's probably going to nag me to sign up, but it should allow me to skip. So just give it a sec. It's nice and slow.
Oof, awkward silence.
Yeah,
Ben.
warming up,
Crank
warming
the
up,
handle, get
crank
the
it up,
hamsters, come
warming
on.
up. So while we wait for that, so yeah, good old MFA sign-up process is slowing us down.
There you go.
So, yeah, use a different app. Sorry,
this is
we're going to have to
because
do
those-
this.
yeah,
Yeah, it's going to force me to do it on
Those
this method.
policies that you've done earlier are
Yeah.
kicking in, aren't they?
So bear with me while I quickly set this up.
No worries, you go ahead and do that. We've got some comments in the background as well that's just saying, like, Ben, how is all of this in his head in one go? So I just want to call out, he's been an absolute legend smashing through this. We are just shy of about 90 minutes in. We've still got a few more topics to go, but we did say we're going to spend most of our time on the Azure AD and InTune piece, and then still coming up, you'll see it comes across the bottom of the screen every now and then. Coming up, we're still going to be talking about Exchange Online, and then we'll be going into some SharePoint and OneDrive configurations as well.
Cool. So I've just added my authenticator. You guys are familiar with that anyway. So hopefully it's not going to ask us for method 2. Yeah, it is. Just going to move that over so
Yeah,
people don't
you hide your
spam me.
phone number, otherwise it'll be up and down the M6 motorway and all the service stations.
So that's just texting me a code. So obviously that's the second method we chose, and it's defaulting to that as part of the sign-up process. So I've got that through, which is good. It's working, which is nice. So, right, cool. So that's doing that. So, yep, so we're doing Azure AD, John, like I mentioned. This is going to get all that config we've already set up. So you can see here. So
Do you
when
want
it's
to pop that back on the main screen for us so we can keep up?
Yeah, just 1 sec. There we do. There we go. Drag that across. So that's just going to take a moment to do that. So while we're doing that, we're going to quickly jump to compliance, because obviously I want to make sure we get through some of the other bits and not waste time. So compliance policies, but before that's in the context of Windows. So I'm going to go up a level. I'm going to look at compliance for everything, because obviously we've set up macOS as well, so we want to look at compliance for those, because we're going to use that when we jump onto conditional access. So compliance policies here. And we're going to, before we do that, we're just going to change our compliance policy settings here. So a quick tweak we make is to basically, if a device, if a machine doesn't have a compliance policy, it's non-compliant. By default, it becomes compliant. I want to know that every machine is compliant because it's got a policy. Quick tweak on there, saving that. So give that a second. We're going to jump back to our policies here, and we're going to create a policy. So our Windows policy here, we're going to do a Windows and later. Again, it works on 11, so you don't have to worry about that. Windows, keep it simple. A lot of this I'm not going to go through because we're conscious on time. So we're going to want BitLocker, we want secure boot, we want code integrity. We know SCCM bits and pieces. Where this is irrelevant for Windows, even though you can set it, it doesn't apply. We want encryption, we want a firewall, we want TPM, antivirus, anti-spyware, we're running Defender, we want up-to-date, and we want real-time protection. You can require Defender if you install another AV product on there. This will still, you can use antivirus, anti-spyware here. These ones will fail because it will be expecting Defender and all third-party, well, Defender normally shuts down once you've effectively installed, like, I don't know, McAfee or whatever. So nice simple policy. We can Defender for endpoint. You can use the machine score risk as well. So you can say, right, it's non-compliant if it's high. So let's leave that there. So compliance, whilst you can set compliance, it doesn't make any difference until you enforce that conditional access. I'm going to set this to 1 day because I want to allow my devices 24 hours to become compliant, mainly because BitLocker will take up to 24 hours. Well, it takes a reboot before BitLocker will report its status back to InTune. So if you don't reboot it, even though the BitLocker driver is completed, it won't update the compliance status for whatever reason. So we're going to next that, assignments. As with conditional access, it's all user-based and then devices. So our conditional access, our compliance policies should be user-based. We can then have filters to exclude personal devices or other types of devices. So these are a bit more control. So you can have, if you're supporting MDM on personal Windows machines, you can exclude or have a slightly relaxed policy, something like that. Not really relevant, so we'll just go ahead and click next. So we've assigned that to all users, click next, create that. So let's just see how our Windows machine's doing here. So you can see this is just making sure your organisation is who it says it is, and we're just going to click and join there. So while we wait for that, because that'll take a couple of minutes, we're going to create our Mac OS one. Apologies, conscious of them going quick, but we've still got quite a lot to go through. So
we are flitting between screens, but
yeah,
I'm sure you
I just
can
want
keep
to
up.
keep,
and of course, you can always jump back on YouTube. You do a quick rewind if we're going a bit too fast, but I appreciate everyone's patience. Thank you. We are trying to smash a lot in today.
Yeah. So Mac OS is, we've said we're doing MDM for Mac OS. So you can see here we can do some bits and pieces, obviously not quite as fully featured as Windows because we're limited by what Apple will allow us to do, or what will allow Microsoft to do. We can obviously require passcodes though, we can require encryption, firewall, etc. So you can see here, I'm going to next that. Again, we're going to set that to 1 day because we want a bit of time to become compliant. It's all users, and then we're going to go ahead and create that policy there. So that's created there, so we'll quickly just jump back there. Okay, so it's now connected to M365 Boss. We're done. I always like to do a reboot here, so we'll just restart that and wait for that to come back up. So when this comes back up, it will start pulling all those InTune bits and pieces we've configured so far. So our BitLocker, our endpoint security, it'll start installing Office and those bits and pieces. I don't want it to install Office because we don't want to affect the internet connection. So I'm just going to jump in here and unassign this, because obviously it will smash the internet and we don't want to affect our streaming. So what I'm going to do is just unassign this really quickly. I say really quickly, it's slowing down on
It's
me.
the Microsoft portal.
Yeah. There we go, just click back, just jump back on here, and we will just remove that there. Cool. So when that comes back up, it'll get all those bits and pieces as well. So we've looked at our Azure AD join, we're going to look at that when it comes back up. We've looked at our device compliance, so now we're going to quickly jump back to Azure AD. So while this is related to InTune, we've done all those compliance, we've done all our configuration, we now need to restrict our access based on that compliance. So we're going to effectively enter conditional access phase 2. So what I'm going to do is just jump back to Azure Active Directory here, and we're going to look at our security, and we're going to click on conditional access. So we've built our base policies listed here. We're now going to look at some of the device-based policies. So let's see what we've got available in our template store here. So our device is here. So what we're going to do, we're effectively going to require an approved app for Android and iOS. So by approved app, we're going to say, right, Adele has to come along. She's logged on with Outlook on her phone. It's accepted the log on. We're basically forcing them to use that. So if we force them to use it, we can guarantee we can get a man policy on there and then protect the data on there. So what we're going to do, we're just going to click and save that there. So you can see here, we'll work through this. It applies to all users. We're excluding the current user, obviously, if we're just testing. All cloud apps, including device platforms in Android and iOS. You can set others there. It just doesn't work. The approved app policy only works on Android and iOS. And then we're effectively requiring an approved client app protection policy. I've never really got that to work quite well. It causes some weird loops. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to head and create that policy, and I'm going to show you some tweaks we need to make as well, which I've discovered over the last couple of years. So we've got approved apps here. So what I'm going to do is exclude Teams. Sorry, just jump to cloud apps. And we're going to exclude Teams because Teams will force you to, it uses a browser to log on basically on the mobile apps. I think sorry, I'm typing random words. So basically, if you sign into Teams on a mobile device, it effectively does a redirection through your browser on the machine to do the login process. If we don't exempt Teams from it, it will force you to use Edge to sign in as that workflow, which more often than not, majority of users don't have it. So you're getting sort of that sign-in loop, so it doesn't work to exclude it. Bear in mind, you can only use really the Teams client for Teams. There's only one client. So we're just going to make that modification there as well. And our grant control here, we're just going to untick this app protection policy as well because it doesn't work. I've never got it to work properly. So the approved client app section here does what we need it to do because we're forcing people down that route. And we've got that man policy assigned with an InTune to all users, so you're covering that base as well. So go ahead and save that. We would turn this on. Bear in mind, you can't do report only mode on here because you potentially get device certificate issues and things like that. So it's either on or off when it comes to these types of policies. So if you need to filter it, apply it to a handful of users basically. So we'll leave that in report only mode just for this. So we've got we've done AMAN protection. So we now want to do a required compliant device for macOS and Windows as well. So what we'll do, we'll just quickly look at our template store here and click on here. So what do we want here? So we want compliant or hybrid Azure AD join devices. We'll use this as our base policy. We're going to tweak it because we're not doing it in hybrid. We'll just go next on here. You can see here it's default into macOS and Windows because that's one of their default templates. We're just going to create that policy. What we'll do, we'll quickly jump into this and just tweak that. So you can see here, we've got all our users, we've got one user excluded, which apply to all cloud apps. Our condition here is we've got this filter to 2 device platforms, so we're doing MDM. So whilst it says compliance within here, you can only achieve compliance if the device is within MDM, because that's the only way you can evaluate it. So that's what I mean by compliance and conditional access. So hit compliance, conditional access into InTune, and then that's where that compliance policy sits as well. So very closely interlinked, so just bear that in mind when you're doing that. You need conditional access to enforce that compliance. So our grunt control here, we don't necessarily require MFA because we've already got a policy doing that. We want the device to be marked as compliant, and we don't want hybrid join because we don't want it. But you can obviously tweak that. So if you did need those, you can tweak. We just want a device to be compliant. One control, select, save. When it comes to compliant devices, you may want to exclude a handful of groups or a number of admins just so an admin can get to the portal to do certain management tasks without having to have a fully managed device. Or you could argue the other way, for admin, you have to come from a managed device. But then again, you need that break glass because sometimes a device can fall out of compliance and it gets a bit tricky. So where there's another policy, which we're going to block downloads from unmanaged devices. We're going to create it now, but we need to configure the application. We need to configure Exchange and SharePoint. So we're going to do that in a sec. So when we get onto those sections. So we're going to click devices again, and we are going to use application enforced restrictions. So basically, whilst that means nothing to us, it basically means we're going to block downloads from unmanaged devices. So we'll just click next on there. And we're just going to create that policy there. And once we create that policy, we will jump into that. Just have a quick look. So the key condition here is this, use app enforced restrictions. This means nothing to us until we do the actual configuration within Exchange and into SharePoint, which we'll do effectively next. So that's that policy done. So that's how you can obviously take conditional access to the next level. This is a good base policy set. You can do so much more with it. Risky sign-ons, obviously that's a licensing condition, but there's lots of bits you can do with SharePoint sites. If you've got the appropriate licensing, you can tag them and allow certain access to SharePoint sites and things. That's overkill for what we're trying to achieve with this, but that's a good set, a good starting point. Biggest thing, MFA and block legacy authentication. They're the main two you definitely need, and it fixes the majority of, well, the biggest security hole effectively on that. So, right, so we're back on our machine here. So you can see here we can sign directly into our work or school account. So I'm quickly going to do that. So just give us a second. Hopefully the clipboard working in Hyper-V. Yep, it's good. So we're just going to log in here. So that's effectively signing in with our Azure AD identity. So that will take a couple of minutes. So that will obviously do the nice hi and welcome. So we've done those bits. So now we're going to move on to Exchange, but we're going to come back to this because I want to show you how it looks on Windows, just so you see what it looks like. So the Exchange bits and pieces, there's not much to it in reality, but there's some useful bits to call out on there. So the biggest one is the shared mailboxes, is to block sign-on of those shared mailboxes. So you will find when you create a shared mailbox, it will create a corresponding username here that allows sign-on. So if someone inadvertently resets that, or it's another attack vector basically for someone to use to attack and bypass those shared mailboxes. I'm not going to create a shared mailbox because it's simple, but you get the idea is you would, when you create that, come in here, disable that. So you'd click on the user, manage the sign-on, and disable. Simple recommendation, always recommend you do that. So the next one is quite a useful one.
Just stop you there for 2 seconds.
Sorry?
If you've got an existing tenant and you wanted to go through, you can run a PowerShell, right? To just go and find all...
Yes, so we'll dump that somewhere. There's a one-liner you can pull out to list basically enumerate all the users that are effectively shared mailbox and whether signing is enabled or not.
Yeah, just to save yourself a job of having to go through and
Exactly
manually
that,
find them all and click
and yeah,
through.
use that as effectively a more of a routine task you may generate automatically as part of a tenant management, basically. So what's quite nice is the ability to, I think we're going to do the majority of these without actually going into the Exchange control panel, which is good. So what we're going to do now is going to look at some of the ATP features. So if you've not come across already, you will see we've got the ability to use safe links, safe attachments, those bits and pieces. So whilst this loads, so you can see here we're down in our policies and rules. I can see this portal turning into another endpoint portal because there's a million options, but we're targeting threat policies, and we've got our Exchange-based bits and pieces here as well.
This is my favourite little cheat for Exchange policies.
It is. It's so much easier. Yeah. So these are the two key things. So if you need to support custom configuration, you use the configuration analyzer. So you can analyze how it differs to what Microsoft recommend in terms of their standard strict protection, or you can use your preset security policies, which we tend to use for the majority of customers because it's really easy. So this will take a couple of minutes take a second to load. So we've got our standard protection, our strict protection. Standard protection is best for everyone. Microsoft have this documented, so if you need to find what it actually does, you can see it, and it does actually create the policies in the back end you can look at, you just can't modify them. So this is as simple as running this. We're not going to be able to turn this on, unfortunately, because this is a new tenant. It needs to run the enable organization customization in the background. It can take a couple of hours, but the idea is you come in here, you select your group or your domains to protect. So you defend for Office 365 protection, you select your managed domains, click next again. You've got your impersonate, I can't even say the word,
impersonation?
That's the one.
Yeah.
You do your protection on there, you apply that to your domains as well, and that effectively secures that. Really easy, few clicks, protected. That saves you having to jump through all these policies listed in here and configure them manually, because why would you want to do that when you can do a couple of clicks, get all the best practices applied, job's good. And well, okay, so the question next, well, how do I create whitelists and how do I allow for certain things? So Microsoft have sort of moved away from you being able to whitelist things, certainly when it comes to a preset security policy. What you can do here is submit messages or block senders. So with this here, you effectively add an explicit block. You can't add an explicit allow. So these are some really new changes which Microsoft have made. If you want to allow, you effectively have to submit a message for review. Even when it comes to spoofing URLs and files, this is only valuable, even though it says block lists, this only allows you to submit, it says allow on block list, it only allows you to create blocks basically. So a missed message or something that shouldn't have got through, you come in here and you effectively whitelist or blacklist, I guess, the value. So leading on from that, so you've got your users, they've received a dodgy email. How does that user effectively report that message? So we can deploy the report message add-on within Exchange Outlook, should I say. So when Outlook fires up, you log into the tenant, you set up your profile, it will deploy the report message add-on as well. So this is in a slightly different portal. So this is in the admin portal. Just double check my settings. So it's in the admin center and we're under settings here, org settings. Bear with me a sec, sorry, where's it gone?
You find that? I'll just let you know we had another comment in just saying, is there going to be a recording of this session later on? Yeah, absolutely. We're currently streaming live to LinkedIn and YouTube as well. So if you want to catch this recording later, you can go to youtube.com/cloudnexus and you'll be able to replay that whenever you want to. Ben, back to you.
There we go. Sorry, I can't remember where it was, but yeah, look that many screens. The idea is you search for integrated apps and you can publish the report message add-on here. So if we just get apps here, hopefully it will be kind to us, and report message. So I've no idea why this is default, because it's a Microsoft-based add-on, and it allows you to deploy this automatically, so your users can come along and turn this on and report messages on your behalf. well, I say on your behalf, it submits it for you to effectively do a review. So we'll click that, done. So when you fire up Outlook, they will get the report message. You saw on the other screen that we had a look at, there's a report phishing as well, so you can report both concepts, but I think the report message add-on does both. So before we quickly jump on to some of the transport-based configurations, we will just jump, we're going to skip the DKIM one, but we'll quickly look at it rather than you configuring DNS,
okay.
just because of the time constraints.
Yeah.
But I just want to quickly look at that. So this is setting up Windows Hello. So this is by default enabled. So
we did have a question about this actually, saying, do you recommend turning off Windows Hello?
Nope.
Because, well, it says we found disabling accounts still allows users to sign in with their PIN. Just wondering if it's a timing thing.
It will be a timing thing, but I would definitely recommend you don't turn it off, just because Microsoft are pushing down that route when it comes to single sign-on and all those bits and pieces. Certainly when it comes to, if you're doing Azure AD stuff, you have to have Windows Hello to log onto another machine. I'm just going to quickly set a PIN and my keyboard.
I think the only time it's good to maybe disable it is if you've got lots of like users who share devices consistently. Like we had a small dental surgery, and they would literally just log on to any nearest device that they went to, and so having a PIN for every single device was quite challenging.
Yeah.
But again, if biometrics was supported, then that was okay. But just having that PIN on multiple devices was a real pain. So in that instance, it wasn't good. But in general, Adam, Ben saying it's definitely a good idea to keep it on.
Yes. Even though it's sometimes, it's a different user experience, it can be a bit of a pain. Yeah, you get that idea.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not letting me set a PIN, so for whatever reason. But what I'll do just to show you it's actually enrolled, we'll just quickly jump to devices here. Windows, we'll have our device listed here. So you can see our desktop's joined, it's a corporate machine, primary user, checking times, it's not compliant yet. So if we click on there really quickly, we'll see our device configuration. You can see all our policies will be getting pushed out, we've created here. So you can see we've got some bits and pieces here. You can see we've got a conflict here. This conflict will be because we onboarded Defender, and it will be doing the same as what our security baseline's doing. So that's probably what that conflict is as a guess. So just bear that in mind. The wizard is trying to be helpful and create stuff for you. You want to go ahead and potentially tweak that. So you can see here we've got nice bits and pieces listed, and yeah, that's the device effectively enrolled and ready to go. You'd obviously fine tune that to suit, but base security of Windows is effectively done on that one. So we are going to jump back into Exchange. So apologies for jumping. I just wanted to make sure you guys saw that without wasting time.
We have got 14 minutes left.
14 minutes.
You get your best Exchange bits in, yeah?
Yeah. Cool. So best Exchange bits, we are going to look at blocking the consumer storage options. So whilst we're not going to do it, quickly mentioned, set up DKIM, set up your DMARC, set up block your automatic forwarding to remote domains as well. But the more interesting stuff is blocking consumer storage options within Outlook, and also conditional access blocking attachment download as well, because they're really valuable in my opinion. So what we're going to do, before we do that, we're going to enable the audit log, which we looked at earlier and we didn't complete. So,
yeah, I had a note to remind you about the audit log.
And you forgot?
No, I'm just reminding you right now.
Cool. So we're nice set command. You can obviously turn this on in the portal. It's really unclear whether it's on or off. It should be on by default in your tenant. We're just going to run that. It's just setting up a new session here for us. So just bear with as we log into that. It should take 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Come on. There we go. Let's have a quick drink while we wait for that. So,
whilst you do that, we had a quick question that said, do we need to publish the report message add-on if we already have enabled the add-on in the security portal? He's referring to the security.microsoft.com.
Sorry, you do still have to create it if you want to make it available within Outlook itself,
Outlook,
within the basically the fact client.
Okay. So if they want to go to that URL in the security center, they could to do the user submission, but actually, you're saying in the Outlook client, if we do what you said, it would be easier for them because it's just in.
Yes, yeah, you need to make it available. I've not seen that actually do that automatically. Okay. So you can see here, some of you guys will be familiar on new tenants. You need to effectively spin up the bits and pieces that are up and running. So you can see here we're having to run that and enable organisation customization to actually do any true configuration. Apologies, we should have done that before, but the idea is we want to show you this is a brand new fresh tenant. So hopefully that won't take 2 seconds to run.
And this is why we didn't want to use just like a demo tenant, right?
Yeah, because all this had been done.
Yeah. We wanted a real life. This is as raw as you can get it, right?
Yeah. So while we wait for that, so as we mentioned, we would block that. Like I mentioned, just to recap on some of the things we've not looked at, we would block the remote forwarding. We'd also set up DKIM, SPF, DMAC as well. DKIMs can be done in the security portal. We'll just do that now. So that's still going to be running in the background. It does take a bit of time to actually complete that. Effectively, I can't remember the expression they use, but they need to effectively fill up the tenant with your customized settings, I guess is the simplest way to describe. So hopefully, will allow us to at least modify our mailbox policies. So we're going to disable our consumer options within consumer storage options within AWA. So we've got one command here, so we're getting our mailbox policy and we're setting it, and we're basically blocking our additional storage providers. If this fails, it's likely to be with this policy here, but that's run, so that's good. And our next section is basically blocking the download of blocking download of attachments and things from unmanaged devices. Mm-hmm. So basically what we need to do here, we're doing another mailbox policy, and we're effectively configuring conditional access mode is to read only. So whilst you configure this to read only mode, you still need to apply this restriction we put in here. So if we just jump back here, we've got our app enforced restrictions. So this little bit here we've got on the session control basically refers conditional access to that setting we've just defined. Makes no sense, but that's what it does.
Right, okay.
I do want to quickly mention app control, so Defender for cloud apps. These more advanced functionality within there. It's not part of Business Premium, but you can do a bit more control with downloads and bits and pieces. This is effectively the default way of blocking that download from unmanaged devices. So if you quickly look at our condition here, whilst we've configured this, we want to exclude our managed devices. So we still want towards on managed devices. So we're going to have our filter for devices here. And we are, filter for devices here, and we're just going to configure that, and we're going to effectively exclude our is compliant equals true. So basically, it will block downloads, except if the compliance is equals true, and we're going to further restrict this on the device platform element here, just because we don't want this to apply to anything but our managed devices. So macOS and Windows. So we're going to save that there, and that's that done. So these are setting for SharePoint as well, which is another one line for PowerShell. If we don't get to it, we'll make sure that's published. But it's effectively using the same PowerShell, same conditional access policy. There's just additional control you have to put in place for that. So I think if we move on to the next bit, so we'll quickly look at some of the Teams-based features. So there's not necessarily that much in Teams to secure.
Well, that's good because you've got 9 minutes.
9
minutes.
Go. Wow.
admin.teams.microsoft.com. Let's go.
Oh. Cool. So I'll give that 1 sec to load up.
I like that super producer Kaylee's just put up at the bottom, coming up next, SharePoint and OneDrive. We'll see, Kaylee. 8 minutes.
Yeah. So yes, to avoid silence, so guest access, external access and guest access, we're happy with defaults. We want our users to be able to collaborate with other people.
Yes, so open federation,
exactly.
we like to leave that, yeah.
Some things we do turn off is the ability for some of the cloud storage options as well. So let's find those, because I can't remember where they are. So where have we got? I think they're in user settings now. So yes, you can see here we've got our guest access and external access settings and bits and pieces in here. So by default these are on. We recommend these remain on just for that experience. Some users, obviously, or some organizations need to further restrict those. Obviously, you can manage those in here. So I'm just going to find those bits. So before we're doing that, I'm just going to look at our meeting policies as well, because there's a policy in here. You may want to tweak the ability for anonymous people to start a meeting, for example. So that will be listed in here. So we still want anonymous people to join a meeting, which is on. we just want to be able to tweak the ability for people to start meeting. Apologies, clicking all over.
So this is the meeting policy, global meeting policy.
Yeah, so we still want these on. So this is, so new tenant, this is turned off. On all the tenants, this might not be turned off. Typically, you don't allow anonymous people to start a meeting, you want the host there. Turn that on or off, depending on what it looks like on your tenant. Recommendation is that it's off. Brand new tenant, it's off, so that must be a recent change. So next basic bits and pieces we're going to do is we're just going to look at the blocking third-party apps. Because there's a million apps within Teams, we don't necessarily want to allow all of them. This has recently been moved. So Teams app managed apps here. So you can get a bit more granular now with some of the permission policies. We're just going to blanket default these to no, but you can allow certain applications, org-wide settings, third-party apps off, and we're just going to go ahead and save that. Again, that's our recommendation. Sometimes you do need third-party apps. The default, you can be a bit more granular with certain policies, have a default block, and then maybe allow certain apps depending on your requirements. So on that, we're going to move on to the...
You didn't do the third-party file storage.
Yes, we're
And I
going to do
hate
that.
to call you back on it, but
Yeah.
I know it's there.
So just mark it in my place so I don't get lost. So third-party storage, so that's app settings. So Teams app permission policies. I can't remember where it is. So yeah, so you can see here we've got our app settings, so you can choose these to fine-tune. The cloud option, sorry, the storage
It's going to be right
options.
up under Teams, isn't it?
Ah, yes, moved. It did have its own setting. So Teams settings. Not Teams policies, is it? Let's wait for this. Come on.
I think it's probably under the org-wide Teams policies.
Yeah. Yep, it's here. There we go. So this is recently moved. I'm just trying to wrap memory where it was. So why do we want Citrix, any of these, when we've got OneDrive and SharePoint? Because they're super duper.
Well, some organisations do.
Exactly.
They might
Yeah.
use Ignite. The one I've seen is people using Ignite, which is the most common
Yeah.
kind of enterprise one, and then the rest were just turned off because they're not needed. But
Exactly.
again, if you need them, leave them on. But if you're not using any of those, turn them off for that tenant.
Cool. So that's done. Teams coexistent mode. This will be Teams only. Bear in mind, in older tenants, this is still depending on whether it can see certain DNS records. It will think Skype's still organised. It's still enabled. So you just need to work through some of those and tweak that as well. So I don't think that will be listed on this tenant. I don't think it will. But yeah, we won't focus too on that because I want to make sure we get some of these SharePoint bits.
5 minutes, go.
5 minutes. So right, we're going to just fly through some of these SharePoint bits. So we'll just go to SharePoint.
So SharePoint Admin Center, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, you win, Kaylee. She got the thing that says, now we're doing SharePoint and OneDrive. Jez says 2 hours was an insane target, to be honest. It definitely was.
Yes.
Jess, you're absolutely right. But we wanted to just try and smash through as much as we could for you. Hopefully this has been really useful, and someone who's watching has at least picked up 1 or 2 really good things and know that you can go back and watch this again and run through in maybe at a slower pace to catch up on all those things.
Cool. So work through our sharing policies. I tend to default this to new and existing guests. The reason for that is because this is your overall default. You can still tweak sites to be more inclusive if you want to allow those anyone links, basically. So default secure, then specifically modify your sites to support those anyone links if you need to. However, whilst we've still got new and existing guests, I still want more control over that. So I want to basically use, I'm going to force guests to sign in with the same account to which the invitations were sent, because I don't want anything getting forwarded on. I'm not going to allow guests to share items they don't own. Guest access to a site, I'm going to say I'm going to be me 30 days because I want that guest access to auto expire just so we don't forget. We want to configure some defaults. So we want our file and folder links to be only people in your organization by default. This is by default, this is not restricting it. So, and choose our default permissions as well here. We want it to be view because we don't want to inadvertently overshare our information. Because whilst these settings are here, these are global. So if you tweak those and increase those on your sites, you still want some of these general recommendations to apply to those. Some of these basic policy settings here are really useful. So we're going to make sure those are set and we're going to save that there. That's that done. Access control. we'll come back to that very shortly. We're going to probably run over a couple of minutes, but basically, really quickly, idle session timeout on 3 hours or 4 hours. We want the users to sign it automatically. The next setting as well, so going back to our conditional access, this app restriction here, we want to be able to break or block the ability for users from unmanaged devices to download. So if we just jump back to SharePoint, PowerShell, so just bear with me a minute while I log on. So that'll take 2 seconds.
I mean, you say 2 seconds, you don't have 2 seconds. But you go. Carl, thank you. Genuinely, that's a really lovely comment. Carl said it's been a fantastic session, some really good stuff that's real world. That's what we were aiming for, actually, is just, this isn't stuff that's designed to help you pass an exam or anything like that. That's not what we're here for. So hopefully there's just some nice real world tips and tricks that you can put in place. You good, Ben?
Yep, so we're connected to SharePoint. So you can see, obviously, just need to dig that URL out and you connect. So what we need to configure is this particular setting here. So SPO tenant, the overall SharePoint configuration, conditional access policy, so you can see that's very familiar with the Exchange one. We're allowing limited access, which is a setting which obviously doesn't make sense because it doesn't match what Exchange are doing because it's a different team developing it. So just to add to confusion. So we set that there. Once that's set, this refers back to conditional access. So basically, if it's not managed with this policy we've got here, so we've got our exclusions for managed devices, i.e. compliant devices, it will then say you can't download, they can only use the web version to view that. Bear in mind, if you're sharing to guests, and guests can only use that web version as well. So that's just very important to call out. Last setting as well, so whilst save files and bits and pieces, the save files within ATP will protect the ability for users to download files, downloading disinfected files. You need to define this setting here to basically block the ability for users to download infected files, because by default they can. So I'm going to set SPO tenant and disable infected file download, true. So I think we've got to item 59, we've skipped a few of those, but I think we're...
Oh, we've lost the feed via YouTube apparently.
Oh. But yeah, that's basically the settings set and configured, ready to go.
It shouldn't have cancelled on YouTube, but apparently we might have lost the feed on YouTube,
yeah.
But keep going then. Sorry.
Yep, so I think we're there, we're done. We're done, we've made it with over 1 minute, I think. Obviously skip some of those settings. I think we've covered the base ones. Obviously there's the whole masterclass concept, if it's of any value to anyone.
Kaylee, you put us on camera. Sorry, Kaylee's just trying to see what's happening with YouTube. No, absolutely. No, look, guys, thank you. That is 2 hours of us going through the most configuration that we absolutely could. We had a huge list. I think we were very ambitious.
Yes.
But Ben, I've got to say, you've absolutely smashed it. You've really blown people away, I think, in the comments with just how much you remember in your head. You've blown us all away with what you know there. If you guys would like to see a longer session, let us know. We're game. We can sit here for longer. We might need to take comfort breaks.
Oh, just quickly, YouTube looks okay, so it might be...
Oh, cool. Oh, good. Okay. Some guys are still okay on YouTube. Fantastic. Well, look, thank you. Thank you for your patience. If this was at all useful to you, let us know. I'm going to paste in a link for a feedback form. I would love to hear from you. Kaylee's put it in. Super producer Kaylee. I'd love to get some feedback from you, right? Just let us know, did we do okay? Was this the right pace? Would you do more than this?
Probably too quick, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. But someone said they've learned more in 2 hours than they have in a long time. So I'm genuinely, thank you. We're really pleased with that. But yeah, if you'd like to see a longer session of this, or you'd like to see a different format session of this, let us know. We're game for it, okay? We do this stuff a lot. You can clearly see Ben does these projects over and over again. So if there's a chance for us to do another session like this, what would you like to see? Should we do a whole section just on MDM or just on one specific topic that you'd like to see us dive into? We're up for it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, on that, I would just like to say, Kaylee, what do our end screens look like? I've forgotten everything. It's 2 hours later.
It's going to go mute. There you go.
Yeah, okay, so look, we would also like to say, everything that you've seen Ben run through today, we do have a little program that is useful called m365masterclass.com. This is not a sales pitch, but if this has been useful, you might find the masterclass useful as well. It's a lot of our tips and tricks and helpful advice tons of those PowerShell scripts that we've used, far more than we've used today. But yeah, if this is helpful, go ahead and have a look. We've got a discount code for you to go and check out there. But other than that, I just want to say thank you. Put us back on camera. Let them see our terrible, terrible faces one last time. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Ben. You've been amazing. Thank you, super producer Kaylee in the background. And we will see you all next time. Thank you so much.
See you soon.